So if you can all see that this verse, Bhagavad Gita 7.19. First, let's just go through the invocation prayers. Okay. Om Agyantimirandasya Jananjana Shlakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupam Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tatta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sutadevi Purnami Hari Priye Shri Vancha Kalpa Trubhyascha Kripal Sindhubi Evacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. I just screen shared that so devotees who are unfamiliar with the prayers can go to the introduction section and follow that along. So I'll close that. Let's come back to this one. So the verse today, actually, before I proceed, unfortunately, you all won't get to hear Her Grace Premarupa Madhavi Mataji. We swapped Sunday Feast lecture, so her lecture will come on the day that I was scheduled down the line. So you'll have to bear with this foolish person presenting. So it's Bhagavad Gita 7.19. This is a pretty famous verse. Most of you probably, I think, will be familiar with it. And I'll repeat it once, and then you all can repeat it as well. Bhavanam janmam ante yanavanmat prapadyante vasudevam sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. Once again, Bhavanam janmam ante yanavanmat prapadyante vasudevam sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. Bhaunam janmam ante yanavanman prapadyante vasudevam sarvamiti sa mahatma sudurlabha. Would somebody like to repeat?
Bahunam janmanamante jnanavanman prapadyate vasudevam sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha.
Oh, Mataji, thank you. You can give the class. You're expert. Does anybody else want to speak?
Bahunam janmanamante jnanavanman prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti sa mahatma sudurlabha.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Others? Okay, if not, then I'll thank you both for repeating this very wonderful verse. I'll just give the context. So reading Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear this term absolute truth. And so the focus, this is going to be a somewhat philosophical lecture in one sense, but hopefully a relevant lecture in that it describes a very important concept in Vaishnava Siddhanta and in our scriptures, and one that Srila Prabhupada emphasized, this idea of absolute truth. So that's where I'm trying to head towards, but not in the format of a Bhagavatam class, but kind of going over the covering of the absolute truth understanding. So we're synonyms: bhaunam, many; jnanam, repeated births and deaths; ante, after; jnanavan, one who's in full knowledge; mam, unto me; prapadyate, surrenders; vasudeva, personality of Godhead; Sri Krishna; sarvam, everything; iti, thus; saha, that; mahatma, great soul; sudurlabha, very rare to see. Translation: after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me. knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Translation again by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge and surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. The living entity, while executing devotional service or transcendental rituals, after many, many births, may actually become situated in transcendental pure knowledge that the Supreme Person of Godhead is the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. In the beginning of spiritual realization, while one is trying to give up one's attachment to materialism, there's some leaning towards impersonalism. But when one is further advanced, he can understand that there are activities in spiritual life and that these activities constitute devotional service. Realizing this, he becomes attached to the Supreme Person of Godhead and surrenders to him. At such a time, one can understand that Lord Sri Krishna's mercy is everything and that he is the cause of all causes, and this material manifestation is not independent from him. He realizes that the material world to be a perverted reflection of spiritual variegatedness, and realizes that in everything there's a relationship with the Supreme Lord Krishna. Thus he thinks of everything in relationship to Vasudeva or Sri Krishna. Such a universal vision of Vasudeva precipitates one's full surrender to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna as the highest goal. Such surrendered great souls are very rare. This is very nicely explained in the 3rd chapter, verses 14 and 15 of the Sweta Ashwata Upanishad. Sahasra Shirsha Pursa, Sahasra Aksha Sahasra Pat, Sa Bhumim Vasvata Vrita, Yatista Das Angulam, Purusha Eva Dam Sarvam, Yad Bhutam Yachat Bhavyam, Utamrita Vishya Shano, Yad Ananyati Atirati. Lord Vishnu has thousands of heads, thousands of eyes, and thousands of feet, entirely encompassing the whole universe. He still extends beyond it by 10 fingers breadth. He's in fact this entire universe. He is all that was and all that will be. He's the Lord of immortality and all that is nourished by food. In Chandogya Upanishad 5.1:15, it is said, Na vai vacho na chakshushami na strotyani na manamasti sate prana iti evaksate prana hi avatani sarvani bhavanti. In the body of a living being, neither the power to speak, nor the power to see, nor the power to hear, nor the power to think is the prime factor. It is life which is the center of all activities. Similarly, Lord Vasudeva, or the Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, is the prime entity in everything. In this body, there are powers of speaking, of seeing, of hearing, of mental activities, etc. But these are not important if not related to the Supreme Lord. And because Vasudeva is all-pervading and everything is Vasudeva, the devotee surrenders in full knowledge. Reference Bhagavad Gita 7.17 and 11.40. Once again, the verse is number 19, chapter 7, Bhagavad Gita. Bahunam janma mante yana vanman pavadyante vasudevam sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. So, Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasnaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvashe Shunyavadi Pashataya Deshatarane. And for my respectful obeisance to His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, is very dear to Lord Krishna, having taken shelter at His lotus feet. Taking shelter at His lotus feet. Our obeisance unto you, O Spiritual Master, dear servant of Srila Bhaktisanta Maharaj, you kindly delivering the Western world of impersonalism and voidism, All glories to you. So the concept I'm trying to go over is this idea of knowledge. What is knowledge? You know, what's the meaning of knowledge? What is absolute truth? So when we look at many religious traditions, and even some traditions where it's called mythology, like for example, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, etc., we see that there are hundreds of gods. You know, God of rain, God of love, God of medicine, so forth. God of war, God of sun. And this is seen even in what's called Hindu mythology by the Western scholars. So how is Krishna consciousness different? How is our Siddhanta, our scriptures different? In which way do they present, you know, a little bit different facet of our understanding? So, you know, normally all these things by Western scholars are, all these understandings, all these mythologies, all these religions are kind of grouped under one setting, almost like a mythology in the current Western world. So we see that from the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and our acharyas in Bhagavatam, as well as in the Gita, that there are three common findings in all these practices or mythologies or religious traditions. The first principle is that by worshiping these different gods, I'm using the word gods with a small g, of nature, basically, you know, God of rain, God of war, God of sun, that goddess of learning, commonly called Devi Devatas in our terminology. One will receive blessings and will have good life. You'll be saved from disasters. You know, I remember my uncle when he was at IIT in India. You know, you could always tell when testing time was coming because he was intensely worshiping Hanumanji, the potency, you know, to do well in his tests. So you know, that was a common scenario. So in the Gita and in Bhagavatam, this is called karma kanda, a kind of worship where you get some benefit out of, a kind of worship where one derives a benefit which will improve one's standard of living and for this lifetime and perhaps for future lifetimes. So that's one principle that's common amongst all these practices throughout the world, these, whether you call them religion or whether you call them mythology. Second factor is, you know, this idea of kind of a morality. You know, we should be good, we should be pious, we should not sin. You know, these are kind of like moral or ethical principles, regulated principles. And the third aspect of all these practices is actually very subtle, but it's probably the most important amongst all these aspects. And it's the idea of surrender, submission. You know, here it's called prapadyate in Sri Vaishnava circles is often called prapanam. So this imparts a kind of, and in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spends a lot of time talking about this concept in chapter 3 and in chapter 4. It's a kind of understanding that we as human beings are small and that there are powerful forces and individuals in this world and in the universe that we have to be submitting to, we have to be subservient to. And so these are the kind of the three principles behind all these different practices, you know, that you should do this because you'll get some benefit out of it. You should do this because it's the ethical way to behave. You should do this because you can understand you're tiny and you need help from others. But in Vaishnava Siddhanta, Vaishnava scriptures, we're talking about much more of an authoritative definition of God. And this time I mean God with a big G, a science of God, which is described by Krishna as Tattvam. What is the truth? And in this way, Krishna conscious practice is quite different from other practices in how it tries to address this in almost so-called scientific manner. And to appreciate this aspect that runs throughout Srila Prabhupada's books, every single book, you'll see that in his presentation of God consciousness or Krishna consciousness, he makes a big distinction between God with a small g and the absolute truth with a capital A and a capital T. So most people in this world are not familiar with this concept of absolute truth, but the Western philosophers have described it before. And so here's a way to understand this. Because in this world, everything is basically relative truths. But Krishna is a different type of personality. So here's an example of something that's like a non-absolute truth. For example, the sky is blue. As you can see behind me, there's blue sky. And this is true. If it's daytime and there aren't any clouds, no rain, but the sky won't be the same necessarily tonight. It may not be the same, for example, tomorrow. And even if it's blue here, it may not be blue in other parts of the world. So the statement that the sky is blue is true, but in a relative way, relative to time and space. And they're unlimited truths, as we have seen in this world. I mean, how many unlimited relative truths have we seen and are seeing? There are many. But there's only one absolute truth. And that's why Srila Prabhupada capitalizes the word absolute truth with a capital A and a capital T, always. And as this verse says, for somebody to actually come to a position of inquiry of this is very rare. Very rare. And here's a very nice section of the Bhagavatam. I'm sorry, the Bhagavad Gita, where Srila Prabhupada, this is in the intro section of the Bhagavad Gita. Can you see my screen, Ratam Vilas Prabhu? Is it visible? Hello? Can anyone unmute and tell us whether you can see?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. So Srila Prabhupada, this is the intro section. And it's, if any of you have, all of you have read Bhagavad Gita, but some may have skimmed over the introduction, I recommend taking like a good solid 1 month and poring over the introduction, because it's filled with a lot of very deep explanations by Srila Prabhupada. Unlike most intros for books, it's not superficial, it's complete. Srila Prabhupada in the intro talks from the beginning level of Krishna consciousness all the way to the level of rasa. So it's very wonderful. So Srila Prabhupada says, just what is the Bhagavad Gita? The purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. Every man is in difficulty in so many ways, as Arjuna also was in difficulty in having to fight the battle of Kurukshetra. Arjuna surrendered unto Lord Sri Krishna, and consequently this Bhagavad Gita was spoken. Not only Arjuna, but every one of us is full of anxieties because of this material existence. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. So pay attention to this amazing next set of sentences. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. Actually, we're not meant to be threatened by non-existence. Our existence is eternal, but somehow or other, we're put into asat. Asat refers to that which does not exist. That's a pretty profound statement. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. Out of so many human beings who are suffering, Bhavanam Janma Mante, there are few who are actually inquiring about their position. Referencing our current verse, as to what they are and why they're put into this awkward position and so on. Unless one is awakened to this position of questioning his suffering, unless he realizes that he doesn't want suffering, but rather wants to make a solution to all suffering, then one is not to be considered a perfect human being. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary to verse 4.34, the verse that says, Tadvadi Pranipatena Paripashena Sevayam Upatakshante Yanam Yaninas Tattva Darshana. Pranipatena, humility, that one approaches a spiritual master in humility and submits some questions. And Sri Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says, the question is, "Oh my master, why am I suffering? Oh my master, why am I suffering?" So that's what Srila Prabhupada is referring here. Unless one is awakened to his position of questioning his suffering, unless he realizes that he doesn't want suffering, but rather wants to make a solution to all suffering, then one is not considered to be a perfect human being. Humanity begins when this sort of inquiries awaken in one's mind. In the Brahma Sutra, this is called Brahma Jignash, Atato Brahma Jignash. Every activity of the human being is to be considered failure unless he inquires about the nature of the absolute. Notice how the absolute is capitalized. Therefore, those who begin to question why they are suffering or where they come from and where they shall go after death are proper students for understanding Bhagavad Gita. And that's what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says. To be a disciple means to ask your spiritual master this question. The sincere student should also have a firm respect for Supreme Person Godhead. Such a student was Arjuna. So let's explore this concept of the absolute truth. And Srila Prabhupada doesn't shy away from it. Immediately in the introduction to the Bhagavatam, he immediately goes into this idea. So this tells you how important this concept is, that it has to be understood by all practicing devotees. I'll just read. All my talk is from Srila Prabhupada's writings and his speech and etc. So you can easily follow it along on your own later when you go to vedabase.io and look up these topics. The conception of God and the conception of absolute truth are not on the same level. Remember, we talked about relative truth and absolute truth, about the sky being blue. The Srimad Bhagavatam hits on the target of the absolute truth. The conception of God indicates a controller, whereas the conception of the absolute truth indicates a summum bonum. So many of us may not be familiar with this philosophical term called summum bonum. So here's what summum bonum means. Summum bonum is defined as the supreme good from which all others are derived. That's a summum bonum. All the ultimate source of all energies. There's no difference of opinion about the personal feature of God as a controller, because a controller cannot be impersonal. Of course, modern government, so Srila Prabhupada here is going to give an analogy. Of course, modern government, especially democratic government, is impersonal to some extent, but ultimately the chief executive head is a person, and the impersonal feature of government is subordinate to that personal feature. For example, we have the US government or the Indian government, and it seems like a faceless, vast organization and impersonal. But that organization has a head and a controller, and that person, that individual is a person. In the US, President Trump, in India, Prime Minister Modi, etc. So Srila Prabhupada goes on. So without a doubt, whenever we refer to control over others, we must admit the existence of a personal feature. See this? So without a doubt, whenever we refer to control over others, we must admit the existence of a personal feature. Because there are different controllers for different managerial positions, there may be many small gods. According to Bhagavad Gita, any controller who has some specific extraordinary power is called Vibhutmat Sattva, or controller empowered by the Lord. There are many Vibhutmat Sattvas, controllers or gods. Notice how God is small case, with various specific powers, but the absolute truth. Notice how absolute truth is, capital A, capital T, is one without a second. This Srimad Bhagavatam designates the absolute truth or the summum bonum as a param satyam. So here, this is pretty dense and philosophical paragraph, and this whole topic is philosophical, but I'm just speaking it in Sunday feast, initial presentation, because it's so important to our acharyas. Srila Prabhupada is saying that the term God with a small case G and the absolute truth are different, have different meaning. He makes this clear in this section when he says there are many different controllers or gods with a small case G. So Srila Prabhupada is referencing this Sanskrit word Ishvara. Ishvara means controller. So in principle, there are many Ishvaras or gods, small case G. And the conception God doesn't have the same conception as the absolute truth, because there can be many controllers or gods, but the ultimate source of all energies is the absolute truth. And that's what Srila Prabhupada is stating here. So here, as we know from the intro of Bhagavad Gita that we read, he's referencing this idea here from Brahma Sutra about Brahma Jignash. So the idea is that the definition of Brahman, absolute truth, this is what's given in the Vedanta Sutra. It says that Brahman is that thing from which everything emanates. It's that which maintains everything and then reabsorbs it. This is referenced in Bhagavatam, chapter 1, canto 1, verse 1, with the Janmadi Asya Yataha statement. That's explanation of the Vedanta Sutra. That it's the ultimate source of all energies. There are many controllers or gods of very specific powers, but the absolute truth is one without a second. And here, Srila Prabhupada, in the second paragraph, adds to the personal aspect of that by saying, Srila Vyasadeva first offers as a respectful obeisance unto the Param Satyam, absolute truth with a capital A and capital T, because the Param Satyam is the ultimate source of all energies. The Param Satyam is Supreme Person. So Srila Prabhupada is exploring the concept of absolute truth being the source of all energies, all the Vibhutmat Sattvas that he talked about in the first paragraph, who are empowered gods or empowered personalities of the Lord's absolute energy. So he's saying, therefore, the absolute truth, the absolute controller, the Parameshwara, as this paragraph goes on to say, Parameshwara, this Sanskrit word, Ishvara compares the import of God, but the supreme purpose is called Parameshwara. So he's conveying this concept that if controller, Ishvara, means a person, then the controller of the controllers, or Parameshwara, must also be a person. So this Srila Prabhupada, you'll notice he references in Bhagavad Gita Bhagwan, when it says Bhagwan Vach, Srila Prabhupada never says Bhagwan. He'll always say the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because it's a very personal, precise term. And now you understand, now hopefully you see why. Because he's distinguishing the absolute truth from this, what he calls the small gods or the small Ishwaras. So Godhead is a philosophical term in Western philosophy and theology, and it actually refers to the absolute truth. And it goes back to the Greeks. And Srila Prabhupada adds to it personality of Godhead. This was actually, I believe, first described, this terminology, Supreme Personality of Godhead, was first, I believe, ascribed to Srila Bhaktisanta Maharaj. Basically, what it's saying is Godhead is the absolute truth, and the Supreme Personality means it has a personal feature. So the idea is that it turns out that absolute truth is actually not just some vague, hazy concept, but it's actually something very personal. Srila Bhaktisanta Maharaj said the concept of religion that most of the world has is a hazy concept of gratitude to a vague order supplier of the universe. I'll repeat it. A hazy concept of gratitude to a vague order supplier of the universe. You know, my dear Lord God, thank you for this food that you've put on my table. It's good, but it doesn't really give justice to the idea of the Supreme Personality of God, the Absolute Truth. So, so if you explore this, you know, what does it mean to say Krishna is the Absolute Truth, the ultimate source of all energies? So Srila Prabhupada will oftentimes, you know, reference this very famous verse throughout Bhagavad Gita and in Bhagavatam multiple times. It's from the Katha Upanishad, and it goes like this: Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetanam Eka Bhavanam Yo Vidhati Kaman. And sometimes, but not often, the second half of this verse is also very important. Tam Pita Gam Ye Anupashyati Dhiras Tesham Santim Saswati Nitarasam. So the idea here is Nityo Nityanam. So we know Nitya is eternal. So there are many Nityas, but amongst them, one is special. This is such an important verse, this Katha Upanishad, that Sri Ramanuja Acharya had given a commentary on this verse as well. So, and Srila Prabhupada quotes it, and the Acharyas do throughout the scriptures. So there's many eternals, Nityo Nityanam, but one amongst them is special. That one Nitya is special. And there's many conscious beings, Chetanas, Chetanam. But amongst them, one is special. So how is that one special? Eka Bhaunam Yo Vidhati Kaman. Notice that word Bhaunam, like the verse we started out by, Bhaunam Janmam. Many. So Eko Bhaunam Yo Vidhati Kaman. So what's so special about this one eternal amongst the eternal, this one conscious amongst the conscious? The special thing is that Eko Bhaunam Yo Vidhati Kaman. That one special being is maintaining every other being. And what's so important about knowing that? Tam Pita Gam Te Anuparshati Dhiras. So Dhira, we know, from Bhagavad Gita, means a sober person. So somebody who sees this one special being in their heart, right? In their heart. Somebody who sees somebody like that in their heart, then what happens? Tesham Santi Shashwati Nitarasham. That person will attain Shanti Shashwata. They'll attain eternal peace. So the idea is to understand that we're dependent on this one eternal amongst eternal, this one conscious amongst consciousness, this one supreme being, this absolute truth. And here's a nice lecture that Srila Prabhupada gave in Rath Yatra in 1969 in San Francisco at an auditorium. So he says, God is the Supreme Father in the Vedas. It is also said, Nityo Nityanam Chetana Chetanam Eko Bhanam Yo Vidhati Kaman. Katha Upanishad 2.2.13. The Supreme Lord is eternal and the living being is eternal. The Supreme Lord is cognizant meaning conscious, and the living beings are conscious. The difference is that the Supreme Lord is supplying all the necessities of life for the many other living entities. So Srila Prabhupada explores this. The Supreme Absolute, he's also a living entity like us, just like your father, this material father from whom you have got this body. He's also a person, and you are also a person. You are son of your father. Similarly, although you cannot see God, we can understand from the version of Vedas and authoritative scriptures, if God is Father, then he must be a person. He must be a person because I am a person. We have to study by analogy, by our reason, by our intelligence. Just like you've got experience in this life that my father's a person, I'm also a person. Although the relationship is I'm his son, he's my father, but both of us are persons. None of this in person. That is nonsense. How can Father become in person if I'm person? I hope everyone's following this. Therefore, those who are impersonalist, their knowledge is not yet perfect. They do not actually know what is the situation of their fathers. Supreme Father is a person, Nitya Nityanam. He's eternal amongst eternals. We're eternal. Each living entity, they're eternal. Death means end of the body. We're dying at every moment as our bodies change. So this death means death of this body, not the spirit soul. Spirit soul is eternal. God is eternal. I'm his son. You are his son. You are also eternal, but just like a particle of gold is still gold, similarly the part and parcel of Supreme Lord, he is also God. It is said that we are partly God, and he is Supreme God, right? We know this from Gita, where Krishna says, "Ma meva amsa jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana amsa." So, so you know, this concept of understanding the absolute truth and its unique relationship with us and how he is maintaining us so nicely, that when we see that with eyes of through the lens of scripture, jnana chakshu, then we get advancement in our life. Because we see that even day to day, you can see how he's maintaining us, because even day to day, when you open your refrigerator or your pantry, you see that you need, we need food, we need oxygen, we need water. So where do these supplies come from? So our scriptures and other religious practices say, well, they come from those that are in charge. In Sanskrit, they're called Devi Devtas, who are specialists basically in the supply department. Srila Prabhupada had given a nice analogy that just as a city has a water department, electrical department, a gas department, and so the universe runs on the same principle. We can see that even in our world to day-to-day worldly example, where we see that when you need groceries, you go to a grocery store. But what happens in the grocery store, as during COVID, the shelves at even Costco went empty. So what do the store managers do? They go to the food warehouse, right? To the Costco, Winco, etc., Safeway, Fred Meyer's. So everybody has to go to somewhere for restocking. And so same with the Devtas. When these gods of the small case G or the Ishvara of the small case I, when they run out of that which they're supplying, that event inevitably happens. We know that. So where do they go to? Well, ultimately they come to that unique absolute truth, Krishna, Supreme Personality Godhead, who supplies and supplies and supplies. So the question may be, just like we made the analogy of I'm a person and my father is a person, so ultimately I must be connected to somebody who's a person. And that must be the Supreme Personality Godhead. So likewise, we're going for maintenance from person A to person B to person C, and then to the Devi Devtas, but where are they going? Well, to Krishna. But where does he go when he runs out of his stock? The answer is he doesn't run out. He doesn't run out. Why? Because he's the absolute truth. Let's explore this. So here's a verse from Sri Ishopanishad. This is part of the Yajurveda. So very famous verse. Om Purnam Adat Purnam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnashya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Advishyate. Ishopanishad is pretty philosophical, so just follow along. The personality of God is perfect and complete, Purnam. And because he's completely perfect, all the emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of the complete whole, notice how Srila Prabhupada capitalizes the complete whole. He's referencing the absolute truth, Supreme Personality Godhead, is also complete in itself, because he, Supreme Personality Godhead, he as in capital H, is the complete whole. Even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains a complete balance. So what does that mean? So what this is describing is a supreme being who is Purnam, perfect and complete. Here translated as perfectly complete. He's so perfectly complete that if you take Purnam away from him, he's still Purnam. He's so perfectly complete that if you take Purnam, a complete unit, away from him, Supreme Person of Godhead, he's still Purnam. How's that for the absolute truth? So Srila Prabhupada says the mathematics of absolute truth is 1 minus 1 equals 1. Krishna can give everything. Why? Because he's not diminished by giving it. The important point here is that, like Srila Prabhupada says, even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains a complete balance. The last sentence. So it's not that, since everything comes from him that he just gets spread out and becomes hazy. He maintains himself, etc. Okay, so this concept Srila Prabhupada explores much more in Bhagavad Gita of the absolute truth, and I'll just skim over it. There's this concept of 3 aspects of the absolute truth. There's the feature known as Brahman, and it's commonly understood as God's, Supreme Personality Godhead's effulgence or glowing aspect. And it encompasses the aspect of God, Krishna, known as eternity, Sat. And also that he's present in a more localized manner, known as Paramatma, in the aspect of every living being and within every atom. And this is the knowledge aspect, the Chit. So this aspect is knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has Satchidananda. And then the highest realization, Srila Prabhupada explains, if you go into chapter 2, he does it immediately when it starts with Sri Bhagavan Vaj. The purport immediately goes over these 3 aspects. That is known as a Supreme Person, Bhagavan, who encompasses the aspect of Ananda, bliss, through enjoyment of his own pastimes. So Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's the absolute truth. And the absolute truth is one without a second, as Srila Prabhupada says. In that he's unlimited, and yet his unlimitedness doesn't define him as being unlimited. So, this is sometimes called that he's the being within itself, not limited by such sorts of understandings. So, how do we see the absolute truth? What do we have to do to come to this point of Bhaunam Janmam Ante Yanavanman Papadante Vasudevam Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha Vasudevam Sarvamiti. Personality of Godhead, Sarvam Iti is everything. See right there? Absolute truth. Satyam Param. Absolute truth. So how do we do this? So there's a nice series of lectures that Srila Prabhupada gave on seeing the absolute truth. And it comes from this verse. He explains this in many verses. But Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, verse 24. Pratibha Daruna Dhumas Tasmad Agnis Taraima Tasmastu Rajas Tasmad Satvam Yad Brahma Darshanam. Translation: the firewood is the transformation of the earth, and smoke is better than raw wood, and fire is still better, because by fire we can derive so many benefits by superior knowledge or Vedas. Similarly, Raja's quality of matter is better than Tamas quality, but Sattva quality is a superior quality by which one can realize the absolute truth. So Srila Prabhupada is pointing out in the translation, as the Bhagavatam does, how do you see the absolute truth? How do you realize the absolute truth? So I'll just scroll to the portion that kind of ties into what we're trying to do. and I'll play this audio. Nathan Vilas Prabhu, let me know if the audio is not audible. I'm hoping it is. If it's not, then I'll just read it.
We can't hear. We can't hear the recording.
You can't hear?
No, not really.
Okay. Okay, I'll repeat it. Okay, I'm not a technology person, so obviously I'm not
Maybe you can
capturing.
do near. Okay.
So I can.
Near your
Excuse
mic,
me?
there's a small arrow near your mic. There's a small arrow you can find. And you can select the speaker. Can do same as system. In the Zoom interface.
Same as system.
Yeah, can do that too, and then try playing again.
Okay.
Let's see if that works.
Okay, I'll try. I'll come to that section. Okay, Nathan Velasper will let me know. Is it audible?
No,
not audible, right?
No.
Okay, well, we tried. So therefore, our training to the student is to bring him to the platform of goodness, Brahmana. Brahmanyati Brahmana. Brahma Darshana, right? This verse says here, Brahma Darshanam. So Srila Prabhupada is saying, Brahma Darshanam means one who has seen Brahma, or one who knows Brahma. He's called Brahmana. Brahmana is not that being born in the family of a Brahmana and having a sacred thread, 2 cent worth. No. Brahmana means one who has seen Brahma Darshana. Darshana means seeing. So in order to see the absolute truth, one has to come to the platform of goodness. Tamasastu rajas tasmat sattvam yad Brahma Darshanam. Yad sattvam. The platform which is called goodness. And that platform you can see God, you can realize what is the absolute truth. So Srila Prabhupada is pointing out to us that how do we come to this point of Vasudevam Sarvamiti? He's saying here that you do that by actually first try to get onto the mode of goodness platform. And then you can see God, or you can realize what is absolute truth. So the question is, how do you come to the mode of goodness? So in Gita it says, Mamchaya Abhyacharena Bhakti Yogena Sevaya. Right? So by engaging in the process of unadulterated devotional service, that's how Saguna Smitityan Brahma Bhuya Kalpate. That you come to this platform that Srila Prabhupada is talking about, Brahma Darshana, by engaging in Bhakti Yoga, and you can overcome Saguna Samitityan. So this morning we read this nice verse from Bhagavatam, Canto 1, chapter 8, verse 36, about Kunti praying that those who continuously hear, chant, and repeat your transcendental activities or take pleasure in others doing so certainly see your lotus feet. So that's seeing the absolute truth. And here's Srila Prabhupada's statement. Therefore, even though the Lord may be present before our eyes, it is not possible to see him unless we have the necessary vision. This necessary qualification is developed by the process of devotional service, right? Mamchaya abhicharena bhakti yogena sevaya. Beginning with hearing about the Lord from the right sources. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the popular literatures which are generally heard, chanted, repeated, etc. by people in general. But in spite of such hearing, etc., sometimes it is experienced that the performer of such devotional service does not see the Lord face to face. The reason is that the first item, Shravana, is very important. If hearing is from the right source, it acts very quickly. So how to see God? By coming into the platform of goodness. How to come into the platform of Shuddha Sattva? By hearing. Hearing from whom? Hearing from Acharya. So that's how we get to understanding Vasudevam Sarvamiti. And that's how we get to understand that, Eko Bhaunam Yo Vidati Kaman, that there's one very special who is eternal amongst the eternals, conscious amongst the conscious, who is supplying everybody's need, the supreme controller, the supreme enjoyer. That's our Lord Sri Krishna. Thank you very much. I'm done. So feel free to share reflections, give corrections, add more information, etc. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We have a couple of minutes. So I'm sorry that I couldn't play that. I was really excited to play Srila Prabhupada saying that about more the goodness. Okay, going once, going twice, going thrice. Thank you very much. Narottam Vilas Prabhu, I guess there are no questions, so no comments. So would you like to, I don't know, is the temple connected yet? The video?
No, Prabhuji, the temple is not connected, Prabhu.
Okay. Then can you show do you think you could show
Yes, Prabhu. Yeah.
the photos from this morning, please?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, please, for tonight's program at 6 p.m. with His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, he's humbly requesting that everybody who's going to join, try to join at 6 because he has to start immediately at that time. He has another obligation afterwards. So you'll probably just go to like 7:15, like 6 p.m. to 7:15 our time. And I think the Lila Mataji kindly sent a picture, sent an email of that. Shripada Mataji added a nice comment that the absolute truth must contain everything within and beyond our experience. That is true. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shrimati Vrinda Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Shri Prahlad Maharaj Lord Singhadev Bhagwan Ki Jai. Shrimatai Sacinandana Dev Ki Jai. Shrimatai Sacinandana Dev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Shrimatai Sacinandana Ki Jai. I think today's kirtan, from what I understand, is Lokanshu is going to do the main Arati Kirtan, and then Aniruddha is going to do the Nrsingadev prayers. Narottam Vilas Prabhu, is someone going to do the chanting for the Purushottam Mass last week? Mataji did.
No has volunteered for that though.
Okay. Let's see who's on this list here today. So, is there somebody in this list that would like to? You can always, chant Hare Krishna after the nursing of the prayers, or a bhajan that you're fond of. Tulsi, would you like to chant after nursing of the prayer for maybe 5 minutes?
Is it just a Hare Krishna or a bhajan?
You can do a bhajan. Narottam Vilas Prabhu, was there a typical constraint of which bhajan to chant?
Because it's Purushottam month and the temples all over the world chanting Chaurashtakam, so we just thought, why don't we also but there's no restriction to absolutely.
So Tulsi, I think you can chant whichever bhajan you feel connection to. Okay, I know you feel very attached to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's bhajan, so feel free to pick one that you feel comfortable chanting on such short notice. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, Narottam Vilas Prabhu, I think temple is joined.
Wait, join Prabhu. I'm just waiting for them to start the video.
Okay. Is Lokanshu there? Oh, there he is. Go ahead and start.
Hare Krishna. Can you start now, Prabhuji? Hare Krishna.
Yes. The video will come out of the temple soon, hopefully, but we shouldn't delay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. सचिनंदन की जय, जय श्री निताय गौरांग की जय, जय वृंदावन धाम की जय, जय श्रीला प्रभुपाद की जय। हरि हरि बोल। कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. जय श्री कृष्ण भगवान की जय. जय श्रीला प्रभुपाद की जय.
Thank you, Lokanshu. Hare Krishna, and then we'll have nursing of their prayer. Nathan Vilas Prabhu once Pujari comes.
Puja is here, Prabhu. They all started the Narsim Marti.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they just started, Prabhu.
Okay, so Aniruddha, I think you're signed up to sing Kirtan, Nursing of Dev Kirtan.
Hare Krishna, Jai Sacinandana Prabhuji, Dandavad, Jai Shri Prabhupada. Did you say Aniruddha?
Yes, I thought Aniruddha is signed up. Am I wrong?
No, he is available. I'm sorry, he will sing. Give me a second.
No worries. Yeah, I saw Aniruddha signed up on the 27th, so please engage him.
He is ready. He's ready. We'll
Thank
sing.
you.
Right.
Thank you, Aniruddha.
Thank you. Good.
सारा कमला लक्ष्मी नृसिंह भगवान की जय, भक्त शिरोमणि प्रहलाद महाराज की जय, प्रभुपाद की जय, गौर प्रेमानंद की जय।
Hare Krishna, should I start?
Thank you, Anirudh.
Hare Krishna, should I start?
Yes, please start. Thank you, Anirudh. Thank you, Tulsi. Go ahead and start, please.
Krishna
Mam bhakti damna simaya niruna Palaya se putra jito yachora Mam bhakti damna simaya niruna Chinnati gauranga pashavandam Nidasi bhimam bhava pashavandam Chinnasi guram yama pashavandam Nidasi bhimam bhava pashavandam Chinnasi sarvasya samastavandam Naivatmano bhakachitam bhuvandam Chinnasi sarvasya samastavandam Naivatmano bhakachitam bhuvandam Manmanase tamasara shigore Karagrihe dukamaye nivada Manmanase tamasara shigore Karagrihe dukamaye nivada Labasa he chora hare shiraya Svachorya dosho chitam me vadandam Labashva he chora hare shiraya Svachorya dosho chitam me vadandam Karagrihe vasa sada hridaye madhiye madbhakti pashadida bandhana nishchalasan Tvam Krishna le pralaya koti shatantarepi sarvasva chora hridaya nahi mochayami Shri Purushottam Mas ki jai, Shri Sacinandana Bhagwan ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Nidai Gaur Premanande. Should I read the translation?
Yes, please.
I offer my respectful obeisance to that foremost of thieves, who is famous in Braja as the butter thief, and he who steals the gopis' clothes, and who, for those who take shelter of him, steals the sins which have accrued over many lifetimes. I offer my respectful obeisances to the foremost of thieves, who steals Srimati Radhika's heart, who steals the dark luster of a fresh rain cloud, and who steals all the sins and sufferings of those who take shelter of his feet. He turns his surrendered devotees into paupers and wandering homeless beggars. Alas, such a fearsome thief has never been seen or heard of in all of the three worlds. Mere utterance of his name purges one of a mountain of sins. Such an astonishingly wonderful thief I have never seen or heard of anywhere. O thief, having stolen my wealth, my honor, my senses, my life, and my everything, where can you run to? I have caught you with a rope of my devotion. You cut the terrible noose of Yamaraj. You sever the dreadful noose of material existence, and you slash everyone's material bondage, but you are unable to cut the knot fastened by your own loving devotees. O stealer of my everything, O thief, today I have imprisoned you in the miserable prison house of my heart, which is very fearful due to the terrible darkness of my ignorance. And there for a very long time you will remain, receiving appropriate punishment for your crimes of thievery. O Krishna, thief of my everything, the noose of my devotion remaining forever tight, you will continue to reside in the prison house of my heart, because I will not release you for millions of eons. Chitorastakam ki jai.
Thank you, Tulsi. Fantastic, as usual. So I think, as you can see, devotees are there doing darshan. So please join 1 o'clock to 2:30. See you tonight for the class. Please, let's all join at 6 p.m. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Any other announcements? And so for Purushottam Mas, Narottam Vilas Prabhu, maybe you can coordinate. We can have a devotee sing at the end of Nrsimha Dev prayer every Sunday for Purushottam Mas, okay?